November 24th, 1944. 31,000 feet above Tokyo. The cockpit glass is edged with frost, thin white veins creeping inward like the winter itself is trying to claw its way inside. Petty Officer First Class Nakamura Kenji can feel the cold through his gloves, even with his hands wrapped tight around the control column of his Kawasaki Ki-44 Shoki. The fighter vibrates at the edge of its ceiling, engine straining, prop biting air so thin it feels like breathing through cloth. Outside, the sky is a hard metallic blue, no haze, no mercy. And cutting across it, thick white contrails that do not belong to anything Japanese. Ahead of him, the contrails converge into something that looks impossible at first. Not a squadron, not a raid, a city. 4 engine bombers, enormous, silver bellies glinting in the winter sun, crawling in long, disciplined lanes over the Kanto plain. Even from a distance, he can count their engines. He can see the broad wings, the tall tails, the deliberate spacing between aircraft, like a machine designed to move across continents without fear. A voice in his headset whispers the word that has been spreading through fighter rooms like a sickness: Superfortress, B-29. Nakamura has heard stories. Men who fought over China spoke of an American bomber that flew higher than most fighters, carried heavier loads, and bristled with guns like a porcupine. But those raids, everyone said, were different. Those B-29s came from the Asian mainland. They had to cross mountains, weather, long routes, unstable supply lines. A bomber that far from its source was supposed to be rare, fragile, limited. These are not rare. These are not fragile. These are arriving from the east, from the open Pacific, from the direction Japanese maps have always treated as distance, emptiness, safety. A crackling order cuts across the net. All fighters climb, target lead elements. Do not let them reach Musashino Engine Works. Repeat, do not let them reach Musashino Engine Works. Musashino, 10 miles west of Tokyo, Nakajima's engine plant, the beating mechanical heart of Japan's fighter force. If that place dies, the skies die with it. Nakamura shoves the throttle forward and feels the Shoki shudder in protest. The altimeter needle trembles near the very top of what the aircraft can hold. The engine's roar becomes harsh, angry, like metal grinding itself apart in the cold. He pulls for more altitude. The needle barely moves. Above him, the bomber stream drifts on, serene and untouchable, leaving white scars that slice the sky into lanes of invasion. Then the first bombs drop. From this height, they look small at first, tiny dots falling. A second later, black blossoms open against the gray geometry of the city far below. Shockwaves are too distant to hear. The bursts look almost delicate. But Nakamura knows what those blossoms mean. Every building smashed inside Musashino means fewer engines. Fewer engines means fewer fighters. Fewer fighters means the next wave of bombers will come with even less resistance. He pushes the nose down into a shallow dive, not toward the ground, but toward speed, trading precious altitude for momentum, trying to claw his way into range of the giants. As he closes, the scale becomes terrifying. The bomber fills his view like a moving fortress. Its wingspan dwarfs his fighter. The fuselage is long and clean, a perfect silver cylinder with gun blisters and turrets like stingers. The tail seems as large as his entire airplane. Then the defensive guns wake up. A wink from the tail, then another. Half a heartbeat later, the canopy rings with the flat, hard hammering of .50 caliber rounds tearing the air around him. Tracers slash past his nose like burning needles. His aircraft wallows slightly, the controls heavy at this altitude. They are not merely big, they are armed. They are flying warships. And Nakamura realizes something colder than fear. If these monsters reach Tokyo from some new American base out in the Pacific, if they can do it today, then nothing in the home islands is safe tomorrow. On the ground, air raid sirens howl across Tokyo. Workers at Musashino spill outside, faces turned upward, squinting into a sky that seems too high to touch. They've lived through raids of smaller aircraft, B-25s, maybe B-24s. Those came lower, those could be hit, those felt like enemies you could at least see as threats. These bombers occupy a different layer of heaven, a ceiling above the ceiling, and most Japanese anti-aircraft guns cannot reach them with enough density to matter. In an operations room inside the 10th Air Division, plotting officers lean over a map of Honshu. Grease pencils hover in uncertain hands. Reports from coastal lookouts and radar stations arrive confused and frantic. Large formation, very high, approaching from the ocean side. Someone does rough math on a notepad. Speed, heading, time to target. "It's impossible," a staff officer mutters, voice flat with disbelief. "At that range, they can't be coming from Hawaii. China is the other direction. Where are they launching from?" No answer makes sense. The Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam have been names in situation reports lately, but to Japanese staff minds, those are coral specks, sugar fields, and ridges, too small, too primitive, too far to host bombers this size in such numbers. And yet the bombs are falling. The bomber stream wheels back out over the sea when finished, still disciplined, still intact, still with fuel enough to return. 1,500 miles south, the answer is not a theory. It is a vibration in the bones of an island. Tinian, barely 12 miles long, flat as a tabletop, white coral cliffs hammered by blue-green surf. A year ago, it had been cane fields and Japanese fortifications. Now it shakes constantly under the synchronized growl of bulldozers, dump trucks, rock crushers, and rollers.
U.S. Navy Seabees, construction battalions, work in a haze so bright it seems the air itself has been bleached. Their fatigues are faded green. Their faces are ghost white with coral dust. Goggles shield eyes that have learned to squint through glare all day and still keep moving. A foreman stands at the edge of what will become runway Alpha at Northfield, clipboard tucked under his arm, mouth gritty from dust. He watches scoop shovels bite into the island's skeleton. Crushed coral pours into trucks that roar away in endless columns. The coral is the key. Jagged, sharp, abrasive, strong. It had once ripped landing craft hulls open on reefs. Now it is being weaponized. Rock crushers chew it into manageable chunks. Graders spread it in smooth layers. Steamrollers follow, massive steel drums rolling back and forth until the coral fuses into something dense, pale, and hard. Later, thin black rivulets of asphalt will seal the top, but the strength is already there, a runway grown from the bones of the island itself. From the air, Northfield looks unnatural, like the ribs of a machine carved into coral. 4 parallel runways, each around 8,000 to 8,500 feet, run east to west across the plateau. Taxiways branch off like capillaries, hard stands spread out like parking slots for giants. When finished, it will be the largest airfield on Earth. Enough space for hundreds of B-29 Superfortresses, enough fuel storage to feed them, enough bomb dumps to keep them flying night after night. The men building it are not strategists, not generals. They're crane operators from Ohio, truck drivers from Oklahoma, road builders from California, men whose hands smell like oil and coral dust, not ink and maps. But every day they shave off the schedule is lethal. Every time a roller compacts another strip of coral, it is another mile of ocean erased, another slice of distance folded inward, another nail driven into Japan's future. Back over Tokyo, Nakamura finally claws his way momentarily above part of the bomber stream. He has been spiraling for long minutes, coaxing altitude and bleeding speed, until the shoki feels like it's hanging from invisible strings. He rolls inverted and shoves the nose down. The nearest B-29 swells in his sight. He thumbs the trigger. His cannon spits shells, recoil shuddering through the airframe. Tiny chips of metal flick off the bomber's wing root. The big aircraft doesn't even twitch. Then the defensive guns answer again. Tracers stitch upward toward him. One round slams into his right wing. The impact sends a jolt through the structure like a hammer strike. His fighter bucks slightly. He breaks away, heart pounding, not just from the danger, but from the dawning certainty. These machines are here to stay, and wherever they're coming from, it's not a temporary expedition. It's a foundation. That night, in squadron ready rooms across Japan, pilots argue over maps. Some insist the bombers still come from China. Others claim a secret base on Iwo Jima. A few stare in silence at the empty blue on the map where the Marianas sit, newly shaded in enemy color. No one likes the truth that is forming. Because the truth is geography has been altered. The Pacific, Japan's great moat, has become a highway. And somewhere out there, on islands made of compacted coral and poured concrete, the Americans have built runways straight into the heart of the home islands. Months earlier, the first step had been taken. June 15, 1944, off Saipan, Mariana Islands. The sea is crowded with ships until it feels like the ocean itself has become steel, flat, gray-blue, and humming with engines. From the bow of an LST, bosun's mate second-class Jack Red Collins squints toward the shore. Even at this distance, he can see the white line of reef, coconut palms beyond it, and behind those palms the dark green rise of hills where Japanese guns are waiting. The man beside him tightens his straps and mutters almost to himself, "Hard to believe this little dot on the map is the key to Tokyo." Ahead, assault waves push toward the beaches. Battleships and cruisers behind them hurl shells inland. Each impact throws fountains of smoke and dirt into the air, chewing ridgelines where defenders are dug in. But everyone in the landing craft knows many guns are still silent, waiting for the reef, waiting for the boats to grind and stick, waiting for men to step into chest-deep water with rifles held high and bullets snapping around their heads. On the flagship, admirals study the island chain like a lock. Saipan, Tinian, Guam, the inner ring of Japan's Pacific perimeter, once believed to be an impregnable buffer. Now they're objectives, because the new bomber, B-29, needs long, strong runways, and these islands are close enough. From here, Tokyo is roughly 1,500 miles away, inside the Superfortress's reach. On the western beaches of Saipan, the first landing craft slam into coral. Some grind to a halt on reef heads, forcing Marines to wade under fire. Japanese artillery crashes into the surf. Men and boats are thrown into the air. The first hours are brutal, chaotic, soaked in blood and salt water. But the assault does not stop. Wave after wave punches in, and behind them, almost as soon as a rough perimeter exists, come the men who will turn conquest into a launch pad, the Seabees.
Construction battalion officers step onto a captured Japanese strip and walk its cracked concrete length, boots crunching, measuring tape pulled taut. Too short, too narrow, too weak. Built for Zeros and twin-engined bombers, not for a 140,000-pound Superfortress with 4 massive engines and bomb bays big enough to swallow a bus. They unroll new plans on crates and makeshift tables. The paper is spotted with sweat and coral dust. The design is simple in concept and enormous in scale. Longer runways, wider taxiways, massive aprons, hard stands for giants. And the base material, the thing they will build it all from, is not shipped in. It is the island itself. The same jagged white coral skeleton that tears boats apart will be crushed, graded, compacted, and made into an airfield that can launch the war straight into Japan. And once Saipan is secure, Tinian will come next. Because Tinian is flatter, more open, a natural aircraft carrier waiting to be rewritten. And on that plateau, the concrete and coral islands will be born. Tinian fell in late July 1944, and the moment the last pockets of Japanese resistance were crushed into silence, the island stopped being a battlefield and became a construction site so violent it felt like another kind of war. The plateau in the north was flat, wide and sun-bleached, sugarcane fields and limestone ridges that had once fed the Japanese Empire. Now it was stripped bare. Strings and stakes went down first, marking edges and center lines with a surveyor's precision that looked almost ridiculous amid wrecked bunkers and shell craters. Then the machinery arrived in waves. Bulldozers, graders, scrapers, dump trucks, crushers, rollers. Their engines synchronized into a constant mechanical roar that never really stopped, day or night. In the glare, the air turned white. Not fog, dust. Coral dust, so fine it got into teeth, eyelids, hair, food, lungs. Men wiped their faces and left pale streaks like chalk. "Cut it 12 inches, a foreman yelled, waving an arm along a taut string line. "Then bring in coral fill to 16. I want it tight enough to bounce a quarter off." Trucks dumped crushed coral into long trenches. Graders spread it into smooth, pale layers. Steamrollers followed, massive steel drums rolling back and forth until the island's skeleton fused into a slab. It wasn't poured concrete in the way civilians imagined. It was something harsher and more direct. The earth itself, pulverized, compacted, sealed, and made into runway. From a distance, it looked like someone was building geometry into nature. Straight lines, parallel strips, right angles, a grid of taxiways and aprons branching out like arteries. And because the plateau was so wide, the planners didn't think small. They thought in the scale of factories and cities. 4 runways, each 8,000 feet or more, parallel lanes that could launch bombers in streams. Hardstands were carved out like parking stalls for giants. Taxiways widened. Fuel lines ran inland. Bomb dumps grew behind revetments. Quonset huts multiplied like mushrooms after rain. A coral island that had once been a dot on an old map was being remodeled into something that behaved like a slice of mainland America. The men doing it weren't romantic about it. They didn't talk about destiny. They talked about grader blades, crushed stone ratios, compaction passes, and how long a roller needed to run before the surface stopped shifting under weight. But everyone knew what they were racing for. Japan still held Iwo Jima. Submarines prowled. Night raids were possible. A construction delay wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Every day without operational runways was a day Japan might strike first, or the weather might break equipment, or supply lines might choke. And every day with progress meant something else. More B-29s arriving quietly from the States, hopping west by stages, Hawaii, Kwajalein, then onward until their shadows began to appear over Tinian's expanding fields. Some evenings, Seabees sat on ammunition crates with lukewarm coffee, staring down the length of a half-finished runway. From one end, the far end vanished in heat shimmer. The strip seemed to run straight into the sunset, like a road aimed at another world. A young equipment operator pulled out a newspaper clipping with a PO of a B-29. He jabbed at the stats like he was reciting a prayer. Wingspan 141 feet, bomb load 20,000, range 3,000 plus. His buddy squinted down the runway and said what everyone was thinking. "Picture that thing taking off from here, straight north. Next stop, Tokyo." That was the shift. Not a raid from distant China with strained fuel and half loads, not the occasional hit and run. From the Marianas, the Superfortress could fly heavy and still have fuel to spare. The distance that had protected Japan for decades was being shortened not just by fleets alone, but by bulldozers and rollers. By October 1944, the transformation was almost complete. On Tinian, Northfield and Westfield spread out across huge portions of the island. 4 great runways, dozens of taxiways, nearly 100 hardstands, fuel farms cut into the interior, warehouses stacked in rows like a supply city. From above, the island's outline no longer looked natural, it looked engineered, like a printed circuit etched into coral. Then one by one, the superfortresses arrived for real. Men stopped working to watch the first B-29s circle. Even ground crews who had read the stats weren't ready for the sight of it up close. The wide wings, the tall tail, the smooth silver hull, the bulging engine nacelles housing right R-3350 radials that produced an almost musical deep roar when they ran clean, and a pilot's nightmare when they didn't.
Each landing was a test. The bomber flared, tires shrieked, and tons of airplanes slammed down on coral and concrete. The runway held. Dust rose in a pale cloud, and in that moment, the Marianas stopped being captured territory and became launch pads. Every Japanese radar operator who saw the blips appear far out over the Pacific was really seeing the work done here. Every air raid siren in Tokyo was connected by invisible line to these runways, bone white, compacted, sealed, and ready.
November 1st, 1944. Northfield, Tinian. Floodlights turned the coral into a harsh white glare, making the vast aprons look ghostly. Metal and shadow, rows of bombers sitting nose to tail. Bomb bay doors hang open like mouths. Tools clatter against aluminum. Ground power carts hum. The air trembles with the steady vibration of machinery. Captain Robert Bob Hawley, aircraft commander of B-29 nicknamed Pacific Thunder, walks beneath the left wing, boots crunching on coral dust. He runs his hand along the leading edge, feeling faint vibration through the metal. "Fuel?" he calls. "Full mains, full auxiliaries," his engineer replies, reading from a clipboard by flashlight. "Tokyo round trip plus reserve. We're carrying more gas than some destroyers." Under the belly, ordnance crews work with practiced urgency. Bomb hoists clank. 500-pounders rise into the bay. Fuse settings are checked. Serial numbers are called out. Tonight is high explosive. Industry, engine works, rail lines. Targets planners have wanted since before Pearl Harbor. Hawley knows about the early B-29 operations from China, Matterhorn. Crews hauling fuel over the Himalayas, half-loaded bomb bays, unreliable supply. It had been heroic and miserable. Here, on Tinian, it feels different. Fuel comes from tank farms carved into the island. Bombs arrive in endless convoys. The runways are long, smooth, strong. The island itself feels like it exists for one purpose. He climbs into the forward compartment. The cockpit smells of canvas, oil, and oxygen equipment. Gauges glow green and amber. Behind him, the navigator spreads charts. Tinian here, Tokyo there. The open Pacific between marked with waypoints and wind notes. "If winds behave," the navigator says, "we'll be feet wet off Honshu with enough gas to loiter if we have to." "Winds never behave," the bombardier mutters, eyes on his optics. Outside, chalks come out. The tower light blinks. And then the engines begin. Starters whine, propellers turn, exhaust coughs smoke. Then the R-3350s catch, smoothing into a deep roar. Multiply it by dozens of aircraft, and the whole island seems to rumble like an earthquake. Far north, in a dim ready room outside Tokyo, Japanese pilots study maps and arcs of approach. Cigarettes glow in the gloom. A staff captain traces possible routes, east, southeast, maybe from the Marianas. "We can't reach them in time if they stay high over the sea," one pilot says bitterly. "By the time we detect them, they're already over Honshu." "An anti-aircraft?" another asks. The captain doesn't answer because everyone knows the answer. The guns can reach sometimes, but accuracy is poor at that altitude, and the density is insufficient. Japan was built for a different kind of air war, not this. Hundreds of heavy bombers appearing from the ocean side, like the Pacific itself has turned hostile. Back on Tinian, Pacific Thunder rolls onto runway Alpha. The landing lights ahead trace a glowing path into the darkness. Hawley holds brakes and pushes throttles forward. The bomber shudders as power climbs. When gauges hit red line, he nods to his co-pilot. Brakes off. The bomber surges forward. At this weight, bombs, fuel, crew, every foot matters. The coral runway blurs beneath, smooth and unbroken. The sum of thousands of hours of Seabee labor. Airspeed creeps upward. 60, 80, 100. Rotate. He eases back. For a heartbeat, wheels still kiss coral. Then the island falls away. The runway lights shrink behind into a thin yellow line on a tiny dark speck. A place stops being a place. It becomes a springboard.
Hours later, Japanese radar operators see the swelling returns far out over the Pacific and feel their stomachs drop. Large formation, the duty officer reports, voice tight. Extremely high, approaching from 160, Oceanside. In Tokyo, sirens rise into the winter air. Civilians step out and stare upward. At first, they see nothing. Then, between clouds, huge four-engine shapes sliding across the stars. A steady mounting roar above the city, a sound that seems too large for the sky itself. Fighter pilots like Nakamura scramble and climb until engines overheat and the thin air defeats them. They watch contrails they can't reach. They feel the humiliation physically, like someone has placed a ceiling above their heads and dared them to jump. And in the weeks that follow, that ceiling becomes routine. By February 1945, Chofu Airfield west of Tokyo feels less like a base and more like a waiting room for bad news. Nakamura steps down from the wing of his K-84 Hayate, newer, faster, better climbing than the Shoki, but still struggling to reach the bombers when they come high. Inside the ready shack, a kerosene stove mutters faint heat. Pilots slouch on crates, flight suits half unzipped, oxygen masks dangling. The mission board shows the same pattern again and again. Sighted formation, altitude estimate, scramble order. Then scribbled notes. Too late. Engine overheating. Unsuccessful interception. The chalk lines tell the truth no one wants to say aloud. The Americans have built something permanent out there. Not a raid base, not a temporary foothold. A machine. Runways, fuel, bombs, maintenance, replacement aircraft, capable of sustaining pressure night after night. Those islands have become aircraft carriers, fortresses in the sea. And that February, they decided in China that the only way to combat the American fortress is to build their own. At some point, Akataki's maps arrive in Japan. In them, the pilots see the Chinese experience manifested on paper. Endless horizons of air, endless lines of industry. The Japanese struggle to reach the Earth on Shiv. The Americans struggle to reach Tokyo from the Marianas. The game has become one of height. Gas and engines, both sides. Gas and engines, but the Americans have more. In the same month, a different conference unfolds beneath lantern light on Tinian. Major General Curtis LeMay stands over a table crowded with charts, cigarette smoke pooling overhead. High-altitude winds are chewing us up, he says flatly. Jet streams scattering our patterns. We fly from these islands, we get up there, and half the payload lands in rice paddies. A weather officer points to a band of arrows over Honshu. 200 miles an hour in places.
LeMay's eyes drift to other papers, construction updates, expanded hard stands, strengthened taxiways, increased fuel storage, new maintenance shops. The islands are evolving, becoming better at one job, long-range bombardment. All right, LeMay says at last, if winds won't cooperate up high, we change the rules. We go low, we go at night. We trade altitude for results. And the coral runways that shocked Japan by bringing Tokyo within reach are about to become launch pads for something worse. Systematic city-leveling fire raids, sustained week after week by an island machine Japan cannot reach, cannot starve, cannot bomb into silence. March 9th, 1945, Northfield, Tinian. The sun has long since dropped below the Pacific horizon, but the coral plateau glows under floodlights as if daylight refuses to die here. Rows of B-29 sit with bomb bay doors open, their silver skins washed pale beneath electric glare. This time the loads are different, not rows of heavy demolition bombs meant to crack factories, clusters. Incendiary canisters packed tight, each designed to split open and scatter smaller firebombs across wooden neighborhoods. Ground crews move with the same efficiency as always. Hoists clank, fuses are set, fuel trucks pull away. Engines cough and then catch, their deep mechanical chant rising into the night. But the mission profile has changed. Lower altitude, night approach. No more fighting the jet stream at 30,000 feet.
Instead, the bombers will skim in under the high winds, flying at altitudes that feel dangerously intimate, trading precision for saturation, trading theory for fire. Captain Hawley, back in his cockpit, runs his hand across the throttles once more. The island beneath him has already proven it can sustain high-altitude precision war. Tonight, it proves something else, that it can sustain a different kind of destruction entirely. "Ready," his engineer says. One by one, the bombers roll. Each takeoff pounds the runway. Fully loaded, heavy with fuel and incendiaries, the aircraft need every foot of compacted coral. The engines howl, the airframe trembles, tires lift, and another silver shape claws north into darkness. Behind them, Seabees remain on standby. If a bomber blows a tire, if a strip cracks, if debris gouges the surface, trucks and rollers will be there before dawn. Coral fill, steel matting, repair, reset. The island machine heals itself overnight. Over Tokyo, the wind carries a different smell this time. Nakamura is in the cockpit again, climbing into darkness. He hears altitude reports and feels a flicker of something like relief. They're lower tonight. Then he sees it. The first sticks of incendiaries break apart over the city like falling stars. Hundreds of small canisters tumble downward. Seconds later, dozens of fires bloom, then hundreds, then thousands. Tokyo does not burn in patches. It becomes an ocean of flame. Wood and paper structures ignite almost instantly. Narrow streets turn into wind tunnels, feeding oxygen into growing infernos. The firestorm begins to create its own weather, air rushing inward at hurricane force, feeding the flames that consume entire districts. Even at altitude, Nakamura can see it clearly, a red glow spreading in every direction, smoke rising in pillars that merge into one vast cloud. The smell reaches him despite the height, the stinging scent of burning lacquer, timber, flesh. The B-29s move methodically through their patterns, releasing payload after payload. They are no longer experimental intruders, they are executioners following a procedure. Operation Meeting House will kill tens of thousands in a single night, more than any conventional air raid in history, and it began on Coral. The next morning from Tinian, crews read reports and photographs. The numbers are staggering, but from the standpoint of the island machine, it is simply proof of capacity. Fuel still in storage, bombs still stacked, runways intact. Launch again. Weeks later, Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama, names blur into a pattern. Each night, radar operators watch the ocean side. Each night, sirens rise. Each night, silver shapes appear from a direction that once meant safety. Japanese night raids against the Marianas have occurred. Desperate missions flown long over black water to strike the new American bases. A handful of B-29s destroyed on the ground, some fuel dumps hit, craters punched into runways. But each time, by dawn, Seabees are filling holes with fresh crushed coral, rollers flatten scars, mechanics patch aluminum, replacement aircraft arrive by ship. The islands absorb damage and continue. Meanwhile, another island changes hands. February-March 1945. Iwo Jima, a black volcanic tooth rising from the sea, once a forward shield for Japan. Its airfields had been meant to intercept the B-29s en route to Tokyo. Fighters could leap from its runways, climb into the bomber stream, and strike. But Marines now claw up Mount Suribachi under murderous fire. Naval guns pound the airfields into shattered black strips. The island falls. For Japanese planners, it is another loss. For American crews, it becomes something else entirely, a lifeline. Weeks later, the first damaged B-29 limps towards Iwo Jima, trailing smoke, one engine feathered. Instead of plunging into the Pacific, it lines up on a rough, newly repaired strip and lands hard. Over the coming months, more than 2,000 B-29s will make emergency landings there. More than 20,000 airmen will owe their lives to that volcanic island. For Japanese pilots like Nakamura, the psychological shift is unmistakable. The bombers now fly as if the ocean is their road, because it is.
They can press attacks harder. They can accept damage. They know that halfway home there is another island waiting, another runway of coral and concrete. By summer 1945, Japan's fuel stocks are nearly exhausted. Replacement pilots arrive with fewer hours, thinner training. Aircraft quality declines. But from the Marianas, the pattern continues. More B-29s unload from cargo ships, more fuel drums stack beneath palms, more bombs pile in geometric rows. In staff rooms in Tokyo, officers whisper what none of them can publicly admit. As long as those islands remain in American hands, the home islands will burn. Then comes August. August 6th, 1945. Northfield, Tinian. The stars above the plateau are sharp and cold. On runway A, a single B-29 is being prepared with unusual care. The aircraft looks ordinary at first glance. Same long fuselage, same broad wings. Its name is painted neatly on the nose, Enola Gay. But instead of dozens of conventional bombs, a single elongated device is winched into its bomb bay, a uranium weapon, codenamed Little Boy. Colonel Paul Tibbets walks around the aircraft with a clipboard, ticking off final checks. For over a year, these runways have launched thousands of sorties. Tonight, they will launch something else. By now, the island is routine in its efficiency, fuel systems perfected, taxiways hardened, maintenance streamlined, the largest airfield in the world operating like clockwork. The bomber rolls, throttles forward, engines roar, propellers blur into invisible disks, just like every other B-29 that has lifted from coral. At 31,000 feet over Hiroshima, the bomb bay doors open. At 8:15 a.m., the weapon falls. What follows is not a fire raid, not a spread of incendiaries. It is a blinding flash, a city erased in seconds. 3 days later, another B-29, Boxcar, rises from Tinian carrying a second device, bound for Nagasaki. Island runway, Pacific crossing, city annihilation. For Nakamura, by now grounded more often than not due to fuel shortages, the end comes in fragments. Rumors of a single bomb destroying an entire city, whispers of a new weapon. Then finally, the Emperor's voice on the radio, soft, unfamiliar, speaking of enduring the unendurable. In a half-bombed barracks outside Tokyo, he sits on a bunk and listens. There is talk of a new and most cruel bomb. But beneath the formal language, he hears something else. We cannot stop what comes from those islands. After the surrender, photographs circulate among surviving officers. Aerial shots of Tinian, 4 parallel runways stretching across the plateau, parking aprons crammed with B-29s, fuel farms, warehouses, bomb pits laid out in perfect rows. On one illustration, circles drawn around the Marianas show B-29 range. The circles swallow the home islands entirely. Looking at those images, Nakamura understands what he felt that first morning in November 1944. The shock was not just altitude, not just size, not just defensive guns. It was geography rewritten. The Americans had taken anonymous coral atolls and turned them into industrial-scale weapons. They had treated islands not as static fortresses, but as platforms, leveled, paved, threaded with fuel lines, covered in wings. From those platforms came the first high-altitude raids that stunned defenders, the low-level firebombings that turned cities into furnaces, the atomic missions that made surrender unavoidable. Years later, grass will grow through cracks in Northfield's runways. Tourists will walk along pale strips of coral, reading plaques about bomb pits and aircraft counts. The plateau will seem quiet, almost peaceful. It will be hard to imagine the roar. But for those who looked up from Tokyo and saw silver shapes sliding across the sky from a direction that once meant safety, the memory remains sharp. The first contrails,
the first bombs from a height barely reachable, the first realization that the Pacific was no longer a moat. Somewhere far out at sea, islands of coral had been crushed, compacted, sealed, and turned into runways. From those runways, war had come home to Japan on 141-foot wings. And when Japanese pilots finally understood that those islands were not temporary bases, but permanent bridges of concrete and coral across the ocean, they were not merely surprised, they were shocked, and they knew the war was lost.